lucky to have Rusty here to kind of help us with this new topic that we're going to be talking about, which is, well, it's not a new topic per se, but it's a topic that is quite near and dear to my heart in particular, because it does help a lot of our patients. And as a nursing home provider, a lot of our patients struggle because they come into the skilled nursing facility and they're under their Medicare Part A and B services, and then their time on therapy runs out, and they've not been able to progress rapidly enough to be able to return to a home environment, and so they now need to transition into long-term care, and that starts to come into the complexities of Medicaid and things of that nature. And so that's why we've kind of asked Rusty to come in here, because he is an expert in helping people to navigate this Medicaid journey. And so, Rusty, I wanted to kind of have this as a fun little back and forth. And we know that you're not providing specific advice to any person on this, but to give us a little bit of maybe some guidance or a couple of pearls that we might be able to use in certain circumstances. And so I'm going to just jump right in here. We've already gone through our disclaimer. We're not giving any specific advice. We're not developing a patient or client relationship with you here. And we're going to just jump right into our questions. So if we have a household that is still paying a mortgage, they're they don't have a lot of assets to their name, how does that necessarily affect their ability in terms of getting Medicaid? Because that's usually the perception that patients have, is that if they have some assets or they have any assets, that it's going to affect their ability to start with Medicaid. So how do you usually respond to something like that, Rusty?
Well, education is always, important, and words are important. And there's two components for this. One thing, as far as the education is concerned, to remember is that there are multiple programs under Medicaid.
Okay.
There's elderly and disabled, there's blind pension, there's SMB and QMB, medical assistance. But you started this with talking about the nursing home. So we're going to do the long-term care aspect of it. So if we're going to talk about that particular program, because, WIC's involved in all that, but if we're going to talk about long-term care, there's two things to keep in mind. There's assets and there's income, and they're totally separate. So basically what you're talking about here, and the first question would be more of an income question, because there is a limitation. I can't remember what it is. It's $650,000, I think, now on equity in the home. So by answering this question here, there's a mortgage. So the mortgage does one thing. It lowers the equity in the home, which is a positive thing on the asset side. Now, if you're paying the mortgage, what happens is there's spousal impoverishment laws out there, one of which is the income that a spouse can get. So there's what's called this minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance, and there's also a maximum monthly maintenance needs allowance. And so this mortgage issue that you're referring to, that can actually help us in going from the minimum to the maximum. The only time this applies, though, is when we're talking about married spouses. And what I'm referring to is the spouse that's in the home, not the one in the nursing home, the one that's in the home, increasing her income. And where that increase comes from is they attribute some of that income from the husband to the wife, because initially all the income of the husband, in this case, would go to the nursing home. So what we say is, hey, look how much we're paying in a mortgage payment. It exceeds the shelter allowance. So therefore, we should have more income attributed. But wait a minute, my income isn't high enough. So therefore, give me some of my husband's income. This is I wouldn't say it's a sophisticated planning technique, but that's kind of easy for me to say after all these years. I think if you've heard it for the first time and you're dealing with this, your dad or your spouse is now in the nursing home and you're worried about your security and all that, it's fairly complicated. But to answer the question that's in front of us, the household who is paying a mortgage, how does that affect the assistance? It can affect it in the sense that it can actually increase the amount of income from the nursing home spouse attributed to the at-home spouse.
Okay, but it doesn't necessarily disqualify somebody from being able to receive Medicaid because they, quote, own a home, right?
Well, that goes over to the asset side, the owning of the home. There is an equity limitation on that, and I haven't had to look at it for quite a while. I'm thinking it's around 650,000 of equity. So yeah, if you have $1 million home, which nowadays an $800,000 home you can fairly easily get. One of the other things that we have to be careful of is the farmers, because that land is all included. So I have one case right now where the appraised value of the acreage is $25,000 per acre. Well, if you have a quarter section, which is 40 acres at even 20,000 an acre, and your house is sitting on the middle of that, you've already exceeded the equity value.
You have.
So yeah,
you have.
It does affect it.
Well, okay, and that's great, Rusty, because that kind of leads us into our next question, or we're going to start coming into this. So what if someone is having a pension? So they have worked for a job, that job offered them a pension. So whether that's like a military pension or like a teacher state retirement type of pension or something of that nature, or even a Ford pension. How does a pension relate to the equation in regards to Medicaid? Is it back to like what you're talking about with the income? So taking into account the expenses and the equity and things of that nature? Are we back to that income equation? And if that income equation exceeds it, would then that make it difficult to obtain Medicaid in that situation?
Well, first of all, in this scenario, we would be talking about married people. And there's a rule that we start with, and it's called the name on check rule. So it doesn't matter if you're categorizing it as Social Security, which I think is a later question, Social Security or pension, or if there's money coming from a foreign country because an ancestor was a citizen of another country. If your name is on a check and it's being deposited, then that counts. So if you're the spouse that's in the nursing home, then initially it's going to be determined to go to the nursing home. Essentially, all of it will go to the nursing home. If you're a spouse that's staying at home, then there is no limitation on your income. So we only care about the spouse. Now in Kansas and Missouri, it won't matter. There are some states where you have income caps, but in Missouri and Kansas, you don't. But what they do is, what Medicaid does is it just says, hey, we're going to give you $50 a month, and we're going to let you pay for any healthcare premiums, insurance premiums, but anything other than that has to go to the nursing home, and we'll pay the difference.
I see.
So for qualification, it doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of how much you're going to have to contribute. What's called, usually they call it patient responsibility. Medicaid calls it surplus.
Okay. Now, does that surplus come in? Because I hear a lot of the times patients saying that they have to spend down their assets and they have to spend their money in order to be able to stay on or qualify for Medicaid. Can you explain that a little bit? What does that mean?
Yeah, spend down. See, you did the very thing right there that is common. You blended income and assets, and you really can't do that.
Okay.
So if we're talking about income spend down, well, typically if you hear the word spend down as to income, you're typically talking about medical assistance. That's just the people that are under the impoverishment numbers, and say, for example, I think it's about $853 of income, but I've got $1,200 worth of income. then I need to spend down, what would that be, about $350 every month of my income to qualify for medical assistance that month. Now, if you're in the nursing home and you hear the word spend down, you're talking about the asset side, not the income side. So what they're referring to is, I think the number right now in Missouri is 5,909, 5,909, and in Kansas it's 2,000. So what happens is you've got two things. If I'm an unmarried person and I go into the nursing home in Missouri, then what Medicaid's looking at is, do I have available resources that exceed 5,909 in value? If I do, I need to spend down to that 5,909. If I'm a married person, then what they do is they do the division of assets, and then it's not necessarily 50-50, but what they do is they take the nursing homes portion, the nursing home residence portion, and they then sell, if it's the husband again, then the husband has to spend down his part of the division of assets to 5,909. And you don't have to, and you don't lose it. There are a lot of ways in the law to preserve assets. That's really what we do. So for example, if you have $300,000 of available assets, that nursing home spouse will have $150,000 attributed to him, and the Medicaid will then say, well, then you have to spend down 140. What would that be? 143,100 in order to qualify. Well, that 143,000 then is what we come in and help preserve.
Okay.
We also do the same thing for unmarried people, but you had an 82-year-old man and a 76-year-old healthy wife, and the man has dementia. He's going to live for quite a while, and that wife is going to live for a while because she's not that old and she's healthy. Well, we want to be able to preserve as much of those assets for her security as we can.
Absolutely. That's huge, Rusty. And I think that's often the situation that so many of my patients get into, is that they now struggle in that regard. And what it sounds like is there are some different resources. Are they too specific to go into any sort of example, or can you give a high level overview of that? Or is it very situationally dependent in regards to the preservation of assets?
Well, there are some rules. So for example, there's one that I like to use. It's called a caretaker child exception. And what that says is that if a child has lived in the house with you for at least 2 years, and according to medical opinion, but for that child living there, it would have been recommended that you go to a nursing facility, then you can transfer that house to that caretaker child with no penalty. So that's one thing. And so a lot of people understand that the house is exempt from qualifying somebody for Medicaid, but they don't understand that the house is not exempt from paying Medicaid back when you die. It's called estate recovery. So for example, if you have too much equity in your house, or if you want to protect it from estate recovery, you can gift it to a caretaker child. Something else that people don't know is that a child who's disabled, so you have a child that's on Social Security disability, this is going to kind of freak people out. There is unlimited gifting to that child. So let's say I go to the nursing home and I have a 36-year-old daughter who's on Social Security disability. I can give her $500,000 and be on Medicaid that same month.
Interesting. Oh, see, this is just what's so wonderful about. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can't be a grandchild, can't be a stepchild. You've got to provide birth certificate and all that. But yeah, but it's kind of like it's just knowing the law, and that's it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's one of the things that's so important. And of course, this webinar is not meant to, replace a consultation or anything of that nature. And in fact, I think it simply highlights the need to get a consultation even more to help people to navigate that. And I think especially on this next slide here, where if you're a household of some significant assets, It's probably, and I'm speaking out of turn here, Rusty, but my assumption here is that you're going to really want to proceed with getting an estate plan and things together in a much more timely manner before you are trying to go into a long-term care facility, right? Because once we start getting into that situation and we're already there may be, things that you can't do, just like with tax planning, right? Like tax planning doesn't start on March 15th of the year after before you're filing, right? You got to start doing that the year before in order to make sure that your tax planning is done the right way. And so I would assume a lot of that has to do with this type of process as well too. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, you're close, because
Okay.
you can do tax planning on March 15th, and you can do nursing home planning, say when somebody's in rehab, getting ready to go over to the long-term care side. But there's a difference in effectiveness. The crisis planning, you can typically save or preserve less under a crisis than you can in advanced planning. And I know without a doubt our fees are much greater for crisis planning. And also outside the fees, I think the one thing I deal with a lot, I had a lady in here just this morning, using all of our Kleenexes and crying, because by the time we're talking about this, the family has been through a lot. Because you think about, if somebody's been married 55, 60 years, there's a lot of guilt in putting a spouse in the nursing home or a parent in the nursing home. And so they've tried to care for them as much as possible. So they've either physically really worn themselves out, emotionally. As well as I do, if somebody's struggling at home and they ought to be in a nursing home, well, the well spouse that's caring for them, they're listening all night long. Did my husband get up? Did he fall? So they have lack of sleep. And it's just so much goes into it now to threaten their financial security. So so if you can get the planning done in advance, then that can offer just so much solace. I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but it can give a lot of peace of mind.
No, I think that's wonderful, Rusty. And like I asked on the last slide, is there any particular, go-to strategy that you might employ for this affluent type household with planning years in advance, so that before anything is happening, neither husband nor wife are needing an immediate transition to a nursing home, but they want to protect themselves in the event that one or both of them needs to go into that situation?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people have heard of what's called this 5-year look back rule. It's a statute of limitations. And what a lot of people don't know, there's another part of that. It's not a rule, it's the law. And basically what it says is that if I ask for Medicaid to pay for me to be in the nursing home, and I fill out the application, one of the questions is, it's asking me, have I made any gifts? It doesn't use that word, but that's what it means. Have I made any gifts within the last 5 years? So there's this period of time, and if any gifts have occurred, then they cause a penalty period. Sometimes the penalty period is not that big a deal. If it's $20,000 that I gifted, then it's going to be about a 3-month penalty period. Well, it's not like you don't get Medicaid. Mm-hmm. So, but the real nice thing, to answer this specific question, the ideal situation would be let's take the people that you have right up there. You have a $400,000 paid off home, $1.2 million in invested assets. We're going to assume those invested assets are not retirement assets, because that does make a difference. So what we would do in this case, somebody comes in and sees me, I'm 61 years old. So let's say, they're getting to be my age or a little bit older, and they just want to do something. Then what they can do is they can actually transfer those assets to an irrevocable type trust. That, when you say the word trust, that's kind of for somebody like me, it doesn't really tell me anything, because there's a lot of types of trust. Most people only know about that regular revocable living trust. But anyway, so if you can do a certain kind of trust, I don't want to lose the capital gain advantages that my children get when they inherit that house. So I want to be careful for tax purposes to have the right kind of trust. Also, I'm not really a control freak, but sometimes people would like to still be able to manage their money. So you want to be able to write this in such a way that they can still manage it. So what I would do in this scenario, I would put three things in that kind of trust. I would put any real estate, lake lots, farmland, any of that. I would my home. I would put life insurance in there because I'm really not going to need that during my life, but yet it does have an effect if I go to the nursing home. And then number three, I would put in there anything in excess of what I would want over the next year. So I would think about, am I going to take some cruises? Do I want to, have some kind of fun? But I wouldn't worry about it too much because if a more experienced elder law planner, we put things are available so that you can still get to that money. You just have to jump through some hoops. But anyway, if you come in and saw me, now let's say I come in at 61 years old or 65 years old and I do this kind of plan, but I'm in a car accident in a couple of years or I have a stroke and I end up in the nursing home. Well, that law says, have you made any gifts within the last 5 years? And then there's a second part. It says, for the purpose of qualifying for Medicaid. Well, I take no medications. As you can tell, I'm a little overweight, but I take no medications. I'm otherwise healthy. If I end up in the nursing home within that 5-year period, it's going to be because of an intervening event. And I've won on this twice when I've appealed, where I get medical testimony that says, hey, according to my opinion, my expert medical opinion, but for this intervening event, there was no expectation that Rusty would need a nursing home. Well, that second part says, then my testimony is that I was not doing it for the purpose of Medicaid. Now, you come in at 85 years old with a diagnosis of, dementia and diabetes. Well, you look kind of funny trying to say I wasn't doing it for that purpose.
Sure.
Advanced planning, and then, my wife loves security. So, kind of knowing that we have now taken that real estate, that life insurance, and those hopefully excess assets out of the picture, that really makes things much more appealing down the road.
That's wonderful. Now, Rusty, one other thing that you said at the beginning of this too is you said that retirement assets are treated differently. So if you have things in a traditional IRA or 401k, how are those looked at differently in the eyes of Medicaid?
Well, the I in IRA stands for individual. 401k, 403b, those retirement assets have to be in an individual's name. So it's kind of funny because if you're over in Missouri and I go to the nursing home, it's all counted.
Okay.
If my wife puts me in a nursing home in Kansas, my wife's retirement assets are ignored. So we've had clients, I had one here not too long ago, where they lived in Missouri and they weren't that old. They were just about my age. So I knew most of their assets were in retirement assets. And so he happened to work back over in Kansas. And so what he did was his wife went to a Kansas nursing home and the house was exempt and his retirement benefits were exempt and they didn't have much else. So she easily qualified. But how they're counted in Missouri, or if they are in the name of the nursing home resident in Kansas, then they're treated as an available resource. And there's things we have to do with that. So for example, we've talked about, right there on the screen, you've got, you got the number 400. I think earlier I said 300,000, a family has 300,000. Well, if I going into the nursing home have $150,000 in IRA, it's going to have to be cashed out. Now there's things we can do to preserve the net proceeds after taxes. And I don't mind doing that because I have to pay the taxes anyway if it's a traditional IRA. And if it's a Roth, then we don't worry about it, but we have to take it out of my name. However, if it's my wife that goes to the nursing home, then I can either put her in Kansas and they'll ignore my IRA, or under this scenario, my $150,000 would be exempt because remember when I talked about the division of assets?
Yeah.
That would be my part of the division of assets.
I see. Okay. Okay.
So there's a lot of little, well, I mean, I'm talking to a physician, so I mean, all those comorbidities and all those words I don't know how to spell, you've always got to balance all this stuff. It's the same thing, we have to look, is it a blended family? Because that adds a whole new dimension, to what we're doing. Do they have business assets? That farm we're talking about, is it income producing? There's so much to look at.
There is a lot to look at, and I think that's perfect, because that leads us into, again, wanting to reiterate the importance of the nuance associated with this. This is not something that I think that the general average person, like, I'm a physician, I'm a smart guy, I deal with patients that are going through these processes every single day, but I am in no way capable of, I don't think, navigating this on my own, let alone, trying to help other people through it. I think it's so important that we make sure that people are able to get in touch with you, Rusty, and to have that consult, because I think it's so important. And I love the fact of, like you said before, is that advanced planning can really set you up. And I think that it's so wonderful that you've been able to win on appeal twice with Medicaid in regards to those patients, that you set this up for them and then something unfortunate happened. And it just really reiterates the taking that extra time is so valuable to be able to help people to get that. So let's pull up your numbers here. So I want people to be able to reach out to you, Rusty. So here's Pat's Law Firm's phone numbers. We've got Missouri at 816-542-3466, and Kansas at 913-380-1701. And of course, their law firm, patslawfirm.com. And I know they're very responsive and they're going to be able to help you in any way that they can. So I just can't thank you enough, Rusty, for coming in this brief webinar. You have already just given me so much information and so much depth and so much nuance to this, that it really requires an individual consultation to really be able to help people to figure this process out altogether. So I am just so pleased that you were able to come on tonight and join us. And I know we had a little bit of some technical difficulties to begin with, but I am just so appreciative of everyone sticking with us to get through to this point. And thank you again for coming on. I appreciate it, Rusty.
Thank you, Doctor.
You're so welcome.